Hello and welcome to this second video about Titian's Perseus and Andromeda. Now, in contrast to Venus and Adonis, in which Titian had to invent a scene to paint, he has literally taken Ovid's words from the Metamorphoses and translated them onto the canvas. He writes, "When Perseus noticed the maiden tied by the arms to a jagged rock face, but for the light breeze stirring her hair and the warm tears coursing over her cheeks, he would have supposed she was merely a marble statue. Unconscious desire was kindled within him." And I think Titian has done a great job here. Andromeda does look like a marble statue, this really pale flesh framed against the dark rock face. Once again, the finish on her body is very, very high, so you can hardly see any brushstrokes like marble. And her face is red. It looks as though she's been crying. You can even see some tears perhaps welling up in her eyes. What Ovid doesn't mention in Metamorphoses is that if she wanted to, presumably she could just hook her left arm out of these chains and maybe free herself, although, to be fair, the chains on her right wrist do look fairly tight. And just while we're looking at that side of her body, you'll notice that there's a little bit of darkness underneath her arms. Now, I would love to tell you that that is body hair, but I think categorically it isn't. Renaissance artists didn't really go in for painting body hair, and anyway, if she's supposed to look like a marble statue, that wouldn't really work, would it? So I think it's damage or possibly shadow, or maybe a little bit of both. And in fact, there's a little bit, there's some dark patches that are pretty much the same on her left arm as well. So then coming over to the left arm, she's got this really weird pose going on, reaching back to her saviour, Perseus. But in striking this pose, her arm is actually almost an inverted mirror image of Perseus's right leg. And then look at her right arm and Perseus's left leg. They're both bent at an angle exactly in the same way, so they echo one another. So there is a sort of synergy, strangely, going on between these two protagonists. And maybe that's a lovely foreshadowing of their future relationship, of their future marriage. Also, the way that the material is looped over Andromeda's shoulder is exactly the same as the material looped over Perseus. So again, a little bit of synergy. Isn't that lovely? But mostly Perseus and Andromeda are in complete contrast to each other. Andromeda, as we've seen, is like a marble statue. She has just this flimsy bit of material to cover her modesty. And I think here that Titian is actually covering her modesty, although of course to conceal something makes it all the more alluring. So yes, he's probably up to his tricks again. But the full frontal pose is certainly the most revealing, the most daring of the POESIE series so far. And it also suggests to me that Titian is continuing his desire, his quest to paint the nude in as many different ways as possible. Danae reclining, Venus seated, and now Andromeda standing, facing us. She's also incredibly vulnerable, of course, and like Venus, her vulnerability is emphasized in the fact that she is naked, in contrast to Perseus, who is not only fully clothed but also armed. And so to Perseus, well, he's engaged in this rather fantastic show of power, swooping through the air in an incredibly dynamic fashion. He is all action, and he's also the perfect opportunity for Titian to really show off his talent for conveying the illusion of three-dimensionality. And he's done that in a particularly flashy way, hasn't he? The eye is also drawn to these swirls of red and yellow, and just look at how the clouds have parted so that he's framed against the blue of the sky. So Titian is a really clever artist, but it would seem even he had his struggles. Now, this is in fact the first original composition that we have looked at in this series. If you remember, Danae was first commissioned by that naughty old roue, Cardinal Farnese, and Venus and Adonis found its compositional origins in a work that was the French art dealer's nightmare, now in Moscow. This one is the original, and we can see that Titian has made quite a lot of changes. It was restored in 1982, and during the process of restoration, it was noted that Andromeda was on the other side of the canvas altogether. She had her back to us, so he changed her position completely. Perseus, of course, also had to change accordingly. And in fact, you can still see, or not still see, you can now see, because paint becomes more transparent over time, areas just on Perseus in which he's changed the angle of the arm, the sword arm, so it was much lower in a previous composition. So it's kind of heartening, isn't it, that even the great Titian had his struggles. So I'd just like to leave you with a couple of really lovely little details. Remember I said that when Titian found Andromeda chained to the rock, he was on his way home with the head of Medusa. Well, the story goes that Medusa's blood actually spilled onto some seaweed whilst he was rescuing Andromeda, and that seaweed turned to coral. So look at what we have below Andromeda's feet. Coral. And finally, we aren't the only spectators to all this action. If you look really carefully to the right-hand side of the painting, there are a whole bunch of spectators standing on the shoreline. It's just a pity for them that they can't see what we can see, isn't it? So in the third and final video about Perseus and Andromeda, I'll be discussing how the National Gallery had always assumed that this painting could not be part of the exhibition Love, Desire, Death, and how they've been proven wrong. See you soon. Bye.